He had never imagined Cersei's eyes would look so tranquil in death. That was what Jaime would remember most in the bleak hours following her last breath, the sudden, eerie calm on her face, as if she had found the one fleeting moment of peace that had eluded her all her life. She had died by his own hand in the throne room, the same place where they had stood so many times side by side, siblings and lovers, plotting and sacrificing everything to see her upon that wretched iron throne. In the end, the burden of her tyranny had been too great, and Jaime had acted in a surge of horror and desperation, uncertain if he were saving her from her own madness or saving the world from her. No one had expected Cersei to die at the hand of her twin. There had been no grand clash of armies and no cunning poison slipped into her wine at a royal feast. It was a swift moment of violence, a single pivot of the golden hand clutched around a dagger. Jaime remembered her body going limp, the blade pressed between her ribs, and how she tried to speak once but only gasped. In some distant part of his mind, he could already hear the whispers that would spread throughout Westeros. They would call him a Queenslayer now, as they once named him Kingslayer. But the reality of her death was as quiet as a midnight tide. He cradled her as she slumped to the marble floor. The black and red rug beneath them was soaked in scarlet, and he stayed with her long minutes after she had passed. There were no tears, only an emptiness that opened up inside him, a chasm of guilt and a strange, undeniable relief. In his head, all he could see was the blood on his hands, on his living hand, and on the golden hand that had brought the blade to her heart. The life that had bound them since the moment they emerged from their mother's womb was severed in that instant. His first words, if he had any, were lost in the hush of the hall, for the roaring flame of the throne room braziers drowned out all else. Servants and guards had witnessed it. Not one stirred to stop him. Perhaps none had truly believed he would go through with it, or perhaps they had been too shocked to interfere. By the time the city guard arrived, it was done. Cersei's face was already losing its color, her eyes half open as if staring into a horizon no one else could see. When he finally stood, nudged up by a sense that lingering too long with her corpse would brand him not just a murderer but a broken man, he did not run. He simply sank to one knee as the Queen's blood stained the front of his tunic, and the gilded lion of House Lannister upon his breast seemed more tarnished than ever before. Silence enveloped him like a cloak. Jaime looked up to the Iron Throne and saw, in its twisted swords, the shape of his entire fate staring back. A hush passed over the hall, and even the whisper of steel boots was distant in his mind. The King's Guard, Cersei's guard, hovered uncertainly near the doors. Their oath had been to protect the Queen, yet she lay dead. Had they failed, or had they chosen to fail because they, too, had seen what she had become? Jaime could not read their expressions. He only saw shadows flickering across faces as uncertain as the wind. He pressed his living hand to the hilt of his sword, but before he could draw it, the Lord Commander of the Queen's Guard, a knight once sworn to Joffrey and then to Tommen and finally to Cersei, bowed his head. A wordless gesture. The other knights followed suit until the entire hall was awash with men bending knees or lowering their faces in reluctance, confusion, or perhaps acceptance. There was no wrathful cry, no vow of vengeance for the fallen queen. Only the yawning quiet that announced the dawn of a new age. The moment felt unreal. Jaime, breathing hard, tasted metal and sweat on his tongue. Blood still dripped from the blade he held at his side. A lifetime ago he had stained his name to save a city. Then, he had thrown caution to the wind and broken a sacred oath for love. Now he had stained his name again. But this time it was for the love he had once believed in, and for the realm too, he told himself. Once more, he found himself alone in the aftermath, with all eyes on him. Who would rule now, they all wondered. The Princess Myrcella was gone, lost in Dorne. Prince Tommen had jumped to his death. Joffrey was dust long since. There were no Baratheon heirs of Robert's line left. The rumors of Gendry Waters might have persisted, but that meant little in the eyes of the law. Cersei had worn the crown like a vice that gripped the realm, though many questioned her legitimacy. The fact remained, though, the throne was vacant. And there stood Jaime Lannister, twin of the deceased queen, son of the revered Tywin Lannister, known as the Kingslayer, and now the slayer of the queen as well. Had he murdered her in cold blood for ambition? The witnesses might say so. Yet, if ambition was all it took, he could have slain Tommen or Joffrey in years past. No, this murder carried a different weight. Some might sense it was heartbreak or the final thread of a man's conscience snapping into two. Others saw it as a monstrous betrayal. The truth was more tangled than any puppet strings, and Jaime himself did not know how to unravel it. Still trembling from the aftershock of violence, he rose to his feet, and the golden hand that had committed this terrible act glinted in the flicker of torchlight. At that moment, something stirred in the corners of the hall. A few quick steps, a rustle of cloth, and a familiar figure emerged. It was Tyrion Lannister. He wore no finery now, only a simple leather jerkin and breeches. His hair was disheveled, his face shadowed with exhaustion. News of his sister's death must have reached his ears moments after it happened. He stepped over the scattered rushes and broken shards of stone, nearing Jaime with caution. He glanced at Cersei's body, the bloody wound a stark punctuation to the tyranny that had ended. Tyrion swallowed hard, then looked at Jaime. In the smaller man's eyes, Jaime saw sorrow, regret, and something akin to pity. But Tyrion did not speak condemnation. Instead, in that breathless moment, he laid a hand on Jaime's elbow and said, voice low, "What happens now?" Jaime could not answer. His voice caught in his throat. For a moment, he wanted to run as far as the narrow sea would take him. Yet something rooted him in place. The realm would descend into chaos without a ruler. Armies might march on King's Landing, fracturing any precarious alliances. The wars had worn the kingdom thin, and winter had draped its cold cloak over the land. People needed leadership, though many would despise the notion of a Lannister on the throne. Still, no one else stepped forward. And there was that shape of the throne, its spiked edges beckoning with a promise of destiny or doom. No man had sat on it with less desire than Jaime Lannister had in that moment. He had once yearned only for glory, never for rule. When he was a boy, the idea of being a king was overshadowed by his admiration of heroes like Barristan Selmy, Arthur Dane. He wanted to be the perfect knight, shining and honorable. But that path had crumbled the day he slew the Mad King, and with every passing year, the weight of his choices had pressed deeper. Now, by some cruel twist, the realm might fall to him. He turned to Tyrion as if seeking guidance, but saw only his brother's uncertain gaze. "Take the throne," Tyrion finally whispered. "If only to keep others from doing worse." And that was it, wasn't it? There was no one else in a place to seize it without inciting immediate war. The Tyrells had been all but destroyed. The Targaryen restoration had broken upon the shores of Westeros, if rumors were to be believed, with Daenerys lost or dead across the sea, depending on whose word one trusted. The Starks in the north cared little for a southern throne, though they might still suspect the Lannisters of endless treachery. The Greyjoys were fractious and self-absorbed. The Martells were a wounded house. Jaime had never felt such suffocating responsibility in all his life. Yet, with Tyrion's words, an echo of what might be done settled over him. He turned toward the throne, letting go of the dagger still slick with Cersei's blood. The clang of metal against stone resonated like a funeral toll. Step by step, he approached the dais. The hall was silent. No one shouted for him to stop. Even those who had fiercely sworn to Cersei stood unmoving, as though in a trance. The iron throne towered before him, its points and rivets sharp as dragon's teeth. It smelled faintly of old iron and dusted rust, reminders of the many kings and queens it had consumed through war, treachery, and madness. Jaime took a breath, set his jaw, then turned around to face the hall. Looking out from the dais, he saw gathered men and women with terror, confusion, and perhaps faint flickers of hope in their eyes. All these faces looked to him. Slowly he sat. The metal was cold beneath him, unyielding. It was more uncomfortable than he had ever imagined. He felt the edges pressing against his back as if the throne itself sought to impale him. A silent vow breathed through his mind: "I will not be like her. If I claim this seat, I do it to bring peace." But he could not voice it, not yet. Words were ephemeral. Action would be his only proof. He found his voice at last. "Summon the lords and ladies to the throne room," he commanded, his tone gruff and thick with grief. "Summon the city's leaders, the High Septon, the members of the small council, and let it be known that I will see them at dawn." The instructions spilled forth, surprising even him. He supposed that was how kings spoke, with authority that allowed for no question. The guards and servants bowed their heads. It struck him then, with a pang of dark humor, that he had grown more like Tywin than he ever wished to admit. The old lion had once commanded a kingdom from behind the scenes. Now his golden son was enthroned publicly. He felt no triumph in it, only an impending sense of doom. Tyrion stood below, shoulders sagging. The two brothers locked eyes. Then Tyrion nodded, in acceptance or in reluctant approval, and turned to begin the work of assembling a realm under the new king, the Queenslayer. Jaime closed his eyes. whispering a last farewell to the woman who had once consumed his life with a passionate flame. There would be no funeral pyre for them to share, no final embrace. In her death, she had looked peaceful, a silence that condemned and forgave him in equal measure. The dawn came in pale gray light over King's Landing. The city below the Red Keep stirred with apprehension. Word had spread through the streets. The Queen was dead, slain by her own brother, Sir Jaime Lannister. The commoners whispered in hush and fear. Some wept for the Queen who had starved them during the siege but claimed to protect them from invaders. Others muttered about the Lannisters' unending tyranny. Smoke from countless hearths curled up into the wintry sky, and a thin frost clung to the ground in places. The city was a place of uneasy calm. No mobs roamed the alleys, not yet, but the tension was a living thing. Inside the Red Keep, footfalls echoed over polished floors as knights, lords, and ladies gathered in the throne room. Jaime had not left the dais since the night before. Sleep had eluded him. He had sat with his back against the spiked iron, letting the cold numb him to exhaustion. Thoughts of Cersei's final expression plagued him in the silent hours. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw her parted lips, the trickle of blood, the sorrowful recognition when she realized he was the one taking her life. He had not yet changed out of the stained tunic. A hush swept across the room as he beheld the newcomers. By his command, the Septons had come, robed in white and gold, to confirm the ceremonies of a new reign. The members of the small council assembled in cautious readiness. Grand Maester Balabar, who had served under Cersei with more fear than loyalty, Master of Whispers Lord Brayton, a man whose cunning eyes flickered from Jaime to the corners of the hall, and Treasurer Ricker, who had taken over from one of Littlefinger's protégés. All watched Jaime carefully, uneasy about the shift in power. Near the front, Tyrion stood with arms folded, a mixture of defiance and protection in his stance. He caught Jaime's eye once or twice, offering silent reassurance. The tension between them was brittle, but for now it was overshadowed by the need for cooperation. Jaime rose from the throne, stepping forward. He looked over the assembly. Many of them had known him as a Kingsguard knight, a man with sullied honor, a man who fathered children with his sister and stood aside while she unleashed her cruelty. Now they looked at him and saw a murderer turned king. He wanted to address each face, to tell them that no one was more uneasy than he, but kings do not speak with trembling voices. He raised his chin. "The Queen is dead," he said, voice echoing. "As you all know, I was the one who ended her life. Cersei Lannister was my sister and my beloved for many years." A ripple of uneasy shifting broke through the crowd. Jaime pressed on. "I will not lie to you. I killed her because she had become a threat to this realm. I've been named Kingslayer once before for killing a tyrant to protect the people of Westeros. Now I fear you will name me Queenslayer as well. If that is the title I must bear to spare you from further bloodshed, so be it." The room swallowed his words. He wondered if any believed him sincere. The memory of how Cersei used wildfire, how she manipulated and schemed, how she starved the city was vivid in his mind. He recalled how she nearly burned them all if it meant destroying her enemies. The line between madness and cunning was always thin with her. He took another breath and continued, "I did this to prevent another mad king from reigning. I do not claim to be a righteous man, but I would spare the realm more suffering if I can." He paused, letting silence settle. He was not gifted with Tyrion's silver tongue. He could speak only from what truth he carried inside him. "This is not the act of an ambitious man," he went on. "This is the act of a broken knight who has seen too many horrors. If I sit upon this throne, I will do so in the hopes of uniting the realm instead of crushing it. Yet, if there is another who can hold this seat with more justice, let him or her speak now. For I will not cling to power if it means more war." The lords and ladies exchanged glances, but no one stepped forward. The realm was too weary. Their houses had been decimated by endless conflict. Even those who harbored dreams of ascending the throne knew that seizing it through blood would only invite further chaos. The hush lingered. It was Tyrion who finally broke it, stepping forward to stand at Jaime's side. "We have lost enough kings and queens to madness," Tyrion said. "My brother has done what he thought was right, as he once did to prevent Aerys Targaryen from burning this city. Let him try to mend what is broken." No one spoke a protest, though the tension was thick. Finally, the Grand Maester cleared his throat and bowed his head. His Grace, King Jaime of House Lannister, he said, the formal words stumbling but audible. Shall we proceed with the coronation? It was so rushed, so hollow, Jaime thought. But the realm was battered, and formalities were sometimes the only thread holding everything together. Without ceremony, the High Septon approached, a gilded crown in hand, one of Robert Baratheon's old crowns, repolished for Cersei when she declared herself queen. Now it would rest on Jaime's brow. If Jaime had the humor left in him, he might have laughed at how little it resembled the regal circlet of Targaryen times, or how unsuited he felt for any crown. He sank to one knee as the High Septon raised the crown. He thought of his vows as a knight. He had broken them all, he had fathered children, laid with his sister, slew his king. Yet here he was, about to pledge again. When the metal touched his golden hair, he felt no thrill, only the cold weight of it pressing downward. He rose stiffly, and the High Septon proclaimed, in a voice that tried to be sonorous, All hail Jaime of House Lannister, first of his name, King of the Undulls and the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, Protector of the Realm. A final hush fell. The new king, the brother who had slain the queen, stood crowned. The days that followed the coronation blurred for Jaime as he struggled to establish some form of stability in King's Landing. The city reeled from the news of Cersei's end. Though she had been unpopular, she was still a figure of fearsome power, and people wondered what changes this new king would bring. Would he be more merciful? Or was this simply a crueler Lannister in disguise? Jaime discovered that kingship was 1,000 burdens wrapped in a single cloak. From dawn until dusk, he met with advisors and lords, reviewed the city's grain stores, weighed requests from battered houses seeking restitution. The winter had pressed the city to the brink. The common folk were hungry. The treasury was all but depleted, squandered on Cersei's extravagances and war. He tried to piece together an emergency plan, leaning heavily on Tyrion's acumen with coin. At the same time, he had to make decisions about the fate of the armies still loyal to the crown. Cersei's generals and bannermen had sworn to House Lannister. Now they must swear to Jaime or risk open defiance. Ravens flew across the realm, demanding oaths of fealty. Some replied with tepid acceptance. Others, like certain Baratheon loyalists in the Stormlands, hesitated. Jaime was uncertain how to answer them. He had no illusions that a single letter would quell all the discontent. Yet, ironically, the realm was so shattered from years of conflict that perhaps they might lay down arms if promised peace. He sat in the small council chamber, head bowed over a table strewn with parchment. Tyrion was at his side, reading a list of the city's supplies. Varys was gone, slain months ago for his betrayals, though Tyrion only spoke of the spider's demise with a hint of sorrow. Grand Maester Balabar droned about a possible outbreak of fever in Flea Bottom. Lord Brayton, Master of Whispers, quietly mentioned that rumors abounded of Daenerys Targaryen's partial return, though no one could confirm if she lived. Jaime felt a headache throbbing behind his temples. This was kingship, 1,000 small fires that threatened to spark a greater blaze. He realized that, for all his reluctance, he must act the part of a firm and decisive monarch, or others would sense weakness and move against him. Still, he could not become Tywin, nor could he resort to Cersei's cruelty. He had to chart a path forward that aligned with what little conscience he had left. Late in the evening, when the council adjourned, he retreated to his private chambers, once the Queen's chambers. They still smelled faintly of her perfume, a cloying lilac and rose scent. The bed remained the same bed they had shared in stolen moments. He could scarcely bring himself to look at it. Sleep came only in snatches. He dreamt of the Mad King screaming for wildfire, of the moment he drove his sword into that tyrant's back. Then he dreamt of Cersei, lips curled in fury as she demanded his loyalty above all else. In his dream, she took on the face of Ares, the eyes of madness, and he was forced to stab her just as he had stabbed the king. He woke gasping, sweat slick on his brow. In these small hours, he found unexpected solace in Tyrion's company. He would wander the corridors and occasionally find Tyrion in the library or an antechamber, reading or scribbling notes. The two brothers had their share of bitter memories, but there was a bond there, tested by war and heartbreak. I want to do right by the realm, Tyrion, Jaime said one night, sinking into a chair near the flickering fire in Tyrion's study. The scarlet shadows danced across the walls. But I do not know how. I am no king. Tyrion regarded him quietly. Neither was Robert, and he sat the throne for many years, he replied in a wry tone. Jaime, you have more sense of duty than you know. You will not let children starve for the sake of a lavish feast. That alone puts you above half the kings we've seen. But I killed her, Jaime murmured, eyes distant. I killed my sister. You killed a queen who was on the brink of madness, Tyrion corrected, though his own grief lingered in his eyes. They had both lost family that day, complicated though it was. If we brood too long on what's done, we won't have the strength to face what's coming. Jaime nodded, unsure if he believed it. But he found in his brother a confidant he sorely needed. No one else, not even Brienne. God's Brienne? He had not seen her since he took the throne. She had vanished from the city with Podrick, possibly to attend to matters in the north. Or perhaps she had left because she could not bear to look upon him after what he did to Cersei. Jaime felt her absence like an ache in his chest. He wondered if one day he could find her again, apologize, or just speak to her of what weighed on him. But for now he remained alone. On the 10th day of his reign, Jaime descended the steps of the Red Keep in royal attire for the first time. He wore a crimson cloak trimmed with gold fur and a simpler gold circlet in place of the heavy crown. The day was bright and cold, the sky a brittle blue. His destination was the Great September, where a mass for the Queen's passing was to be held. Some demanded it as a matter of tradition to quell any unrest. Others thought it hypocritical to honor a queen who had spread so much suffering. Yet tradition was tradition, and to show some measure of respect, if only for her station, might help unify the city. The procession was sparse. Knights of the King's Guard flanked Jaime, though the rank was all but diminished. Some died in the wars, others in the wildfire explosion that destroyed the old Great September of Baelor. Now the reconstituted sept was humbler, built anew in the ashes. It still bore scaffolding in places. The high road leading to it was lined with onlookers, quiet and curious, sizing up the new king. Jaime tried not to meet their eyes, but he caught the expression of a young mother holding a child on her hip. She stared at him with something like hope or dread, as if uncertain whether to bow or hiss. When they reached the sept, the bells tolled. Inside, the light fell through colored glass, illuminating motes of dust that hung in the air. Cersei's body lay in a casket near the altar, decked in Lannister red and gold. Jaime had not allowed her to be embalmed or displayed at length, for no crowd would come to mourn her. Yet, for this ceremony, her coffin was present, closed, adorned with the lion's sigil. The High Septon presided over a short, somber rite. Incense wafted, heavy and sweet. Jaime stood at the front, face stony, while a handful of nobles recited half-hearted prayers. He recalled the funeral for Joffrey in this same city, how the nobles had whispered behind their hands. Now there were fewer left. War had culled so many. Tyrion stood to Jaime's right, silent. On his left was no one. He felt strangely hollow. At the close of the service, the High Septon raised his voice, calling for the seven to guide the Queen's soul to rest. Jaime felt only the dryness in his throat. As they turned to leave, footsteps echoed behind him. A hush spread as the doors swung open. Standing in the entryway was Brienne of Tarth, clothed in a travel-stained cloak of sapphire color. She wore her plate and mail, though it looked battered from a recent journey. Her blue eyes fell on Jaime, and he met her gaze with a jolt of surprise and a rush of conflicted feelings. Of all times, she had chosen to return today. The crowd parted as she approached. Her hair was longer now, still golden straw, and though her face was set in a stern mask, he could see the flicker of sorrow in her eyes. Tyrion cleared his throat and offered a slight bow to her. She bowed awkwardly back, attention never leaving Jaime. Jaime felt his heart hammer against his rib cage. Memories of shared nights, confessions in candlelit rooms, and a sense of something unspoken bound them. But the gulf between them now was vast. He was a king, and he had taken the life of his own sister. They had parted ways uncertainly before. Now who knew what she thought of him? "Your Grace," she said, inclining her head, formal as a sworn knight. "I have returned from the north, bearing a letter from Lady Sansa Stark." Her voice was carefully neutral, but a faint tremor betrayed her. Jaime forced himself to nod, motioning her aside from the rest of the mourners. "Walk with me," he said, trying to sound regal. The words felt hollow. But he had responsibilities, and any message from the Starks was of utmost importance. He glanced at Tyrion and the High Septon, who politely withdrew to give them privacy. The assembly began to filter out, leaving only Jaime, Brienne, and a lingering hush in the sept. They moved to a side alcove where a mosaic of the seven glimmered in colored glass. The day's cold light cast patterns on the stone floor. Brienne pulled a parchment from her belt and handed it over. Her gloved hand brushed against Jaime's golden prosthetic. For an instant it seemed they both inhaled sharply, remembering a time when he had pressed that hand upon her flesh in desperate intimacy. Jaime looked away, focusing on the parchment's words. Lady Sansa wrote respectfully but firmly, acknowledging the news of Queen Cersei's death and the ascension of King Jaime. She spoke of the North's desire to remain free and separate as had been declared under Queen in the North, but she also recognized that an immediate break might cause bloodshed. She proposed a summit in the Trident to discuss terms of peace, referencing old alliances and the necessity of unity in the face of the long winter. Jaime read it twice, the tension in his jaw tightening. The North wanted autonomy, or at least a measure of it, and they saw an opportunity now that House Lannister was vulnerable. He could not dismiss the request outright. He respected Sansa's shrewdness in approaching him with civility instead of open defiance. The realm was tired of war, and perhaps some compromise could be found. He folded the parchment. "Tell Lady Sansa I will consider her proposal," he said quietly. "A summit may be best for us all. The realm cannot endure another conflict." Brienne nodded. Her posture was stiff, as if she were bracing herself for a blow. Jaime glanced at her face, uncertain how to speak to her now that he was king. He wanted to ask how she fared, how her journey had been, how her heart weathered the storms of the North. More than anything, he wanted to apologize for leaving the way he had, for returning to Cersei and all that had happened. But the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he cleared his throat and managed, "Your travels must have been harsh. You are welcome in the Red Keep if you wish. The city is not the most pleasant place, but you have a place here." She hesitated. "Thank you, Your Grace. I came because I felt it important that the letter reach you swiftly. And I heard rumors about Cersei." Her gaze flickered around them as if dreading being overheard. "Is it true that you—" "Yes," he replied simply before she could finish. He could not read her expression. Pity? Horror? Relief? It might have been all three. He expected her to demand an explanation. Instead, she only let out a soft breath. "I won't ask for details," she said. "I know you would not have done it lightly." That touched him more deeply than any act of fealty or any vow. She believed, or at least understood, that there had to be a reason. That alone felt like a flicker of absolution. He bowed his head. "I would tell you more, but it weighs on me heavily." She reached out, almost touching his arm, but then withdrew. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Then her voice hardened into something resolute. "If you truly mean to seek a peace, I will help in any way I can. If that means speaking for you at the summit or escorting you north, I will do it." He nodded. "Your sword would be welcome. Your counsel too." They stood there, the silence between them full of words unspoken, of betrayal, of longing, of regret. The sept around them felt like an empty shell, even with the lingering presence of Cersei's coffin not far away. Jaime realized that he did not want to linger in this place of death. The realm was battered enough, and he craved the fresh air. "Walk with me to the courtyard," he suggested. "The day is cold, but the sun is bright." And so they left the great September together, stepping back out into the bustle of the city. Though the ceremony had ended, a few citizens lingered, craning their necks for a look at the new king and the tall warrior woman by his side. Jaime ignored them. The crisp air cleared his head, and he found himself grateful for Brienne's presence, complicated though it was. She reminded him of honor, of a time when he thought he might reclaim some sense of justice. Perhaps that was what the realm needed now, an ideal that was not soaked in cynicism. Word spread quickly of the summit in the Trident. Many lords received ravens inviting them to speak for peace. The idea of a meeting on neutral ground had mixed reactions, but as winter's grip tightened, fewer dared risk large-scale war. House Tully, under the leadership of Edmure Tully, still reeling from captivity under the frays, agreed to host the gathering near Riverrun. Messengers flew back and forth with final arrangements. Jaime prepared for the journey. He would leave Tyrion as Hand of the King to oversee the city in his absence. A portion of the King's Guard would accompany Jaime along with a small retinue. Brienne pledged herself to his service, albeit informally, to ensure that the meeting was not a trap by the North or any other faction. Jaime accepted. He found that he trusted her sword more than most. He also knew that her presence might show other lords his willingness to mend old wounds. Brienne had once been loyal to House Stark in a sense, having served Lady Catelyn. Before departing, Jaime spent a night in the small council chamber, finalizing details with Tyrion. Candles burned low. The city was quiet under a stark moon. "Remember," he told Tyrion, "no sudden measures. Let the city see that we have no desire for tyranny. If trouble arises, I can handle it, brother," Tyrion replied, rubbing his temples. "I've managed King's Landing under madness before. This is practically a vacation by comparison." Despite the jest, Jaime saw lines of worry etched in Tyrion's face. Their burdens weighed on them both. At dawn, Jaime led his procession out of the Red Keep, clad in armor polished to a brilliant gold sheen, his crimson cloak trailing behind him. His golden hand rested on the reins of his stallion. Brienne rode at his side on a tall, dapple-gray mare, her sword angled across her saddle. The city's small folk watched from windows and balconies, too cowed or too weary to cheer. Some might have spat if not for the presence of guards. Jaime offered a grim smile to no one in particular, uncertain if he deserved their adulation or scorn. They crossed the city gates and took the King's Road north. The journey stretched over days of cold wind and leafless forests. The biting chill of winter painted the land in drab hues. Soldiers huddled around fires each night, cursing the cold but thankful for the relative peace. Jaime maintained a steady pace, wanting to arrive in good time without wearying the horses. Along the way, they passed villages still showing the scars of war, burned-out cottages, fields left fallow, starved livestock. Peasants stared at them with hollow eyes. Jaime could not bring himself to speak to them. Their misery was a testament to the greed and feuds of the great houses, including his own. He felt that old twinge, the question of whether he should have done more to stop the cruelty. But kings cannot dwell forever in regret. Sometimes in the quiet evenings he would speak softly with Brienne, who rode near him. They discussed the state of the north, the rumors of White Walkers that once threatened the realm. That menace had receded, apparently defeated by combined forces long before, though the cold remained. They spoke, too, of the days they had traveled together in search of Sansa and Arya Stark and how that journey had changed them both. A bond lingered, fragile and unspoken, but real. Jaime felt lighter for it. They arrived at the outskirts of Riverrun under a slate-gray sky, the castle's sturdy walls mirrored in the still waters of the Red Fork. The Tully banner, a leaping trout, flapped in the wind. They set camp just beyond the castle, though Edmure offered them lodging inside. Jaime insisted on caution, not wanting to appear as though he would seize Riverrun. He remembered all too well his siege of this place years ago, forcing Edmure's surrender. The memory was bitter. Now they were here seeking peace. In the days that followed, delegations arrived from various corners of Westeros, the north, led by Lady Sansa Stark and her brother, Bran the Broken, though rumors said that he was more concerned with spiritual matters than governance. The Vale was represented by Lord Robin Arryn, still nervous and pale, guided by older counselors. The Stormlands had sent a lesser lord in the Baratheon line, who pressed a falcon sigil newly minted to represent a branch of their house. The Reach, still healing from the destruction of House Tyrell, was overseen by Lord Tarly, though it was Samwell Tarly's father who had died, and Samwell himself was a maester in training somewhere far away. Dorne was the most aloof, sending a small retinue of Martell cousins who had survived the fiasco of Valeria Sand. It was a fragile coalition, each with their own grievances. Jaime felt the tension in the great hall of Riverrun when they first assembled. He wore a simpler tunic. No shining armor, no lavish crown. He wanted to show humility. The northern lords cast suspicious glares at him, remembering the Red Wedding and the Lannister involvement. The Stormland envoy eyed him warily, uncertain what claim House Lannister truly had to the throne. Sansa Stark took a seat at the high table across from Jaime. She had grown into a poised woman, regal in her bearing, clad in a fur-lined gown of stark gray. Her auburn hair was pinned back in a practical style. She regarded Jaime with a cool dignity. He offered her a curt bow. Their eyes locked, and he remembered how she once was betrothed to Joffrey, how he had not lifted a finger to spare her from that torment. The guilt swirled within him. The meeting began, and voices rose with demands and concessions. The North wanted autonomy, or at least a status akin to a vassal in name only. The Vale wanted guaranteed trade routes. Dorne demanded justice for the atrocities they had suffered under the Mountain and the Old Regime. The Stormlands insisted on reaffirming certain rights and titles. The Iron Islands had refused to attend, which was worrisome. Yara Greyjoy was said to be forging her own future on the seas. Jaime listened, measured responses, tried to remain calm. At times, the negotiations turned heated. Lord Tarly nearly stormed out when mention was made of distributing Reach grain to the capital. Sansa pressed her claim that the North could not bend the knee again, not after the decimation of their people. Jaime tried to maintain a conciliatory tone, aware that each concession he granted might weaken his authority, but also aware that refusing them outright would lead to violence. He was tired of war. That was the refrain that played in his mind. If bending on these issues would save thousands of lives, was it not worth it? But he had to be cautious, for any sign of weakness might embolden a rebellion. The realm still needed a unifying force, or every region would break off into petty kingdoms. He tried to find a middle path. Sansa tested him, though not maliciously. She wanted to see how far he would go for peace, if his remorse was genuine or a facade. "And what of the crimes committed against House Stark?" she asked one evening, her voice cutting through the hall. "Your father orchestrated the Red Wedding. Your sister oversaw the torment of my sister Arya. Shall House Stark simply forget?" Jaime faced her solemnly. He had no good answer. "No, my lady," he said quietly. "House Stark should never forget. But I ask that you lay aside vengeance for the sake of the living. My father is dead, my sister is dead, and I bear the weight of their sins as king. If there is restitution I can make, name it. If it is justice you seek, then I stand ready to offer what I can. But let us not punish thousands for the sins of the few." She studied him for a long moment, then inclined her head. "We do not seek war," she said. "We seek respect and the freedom to govern the North as we see fit." Negotiations wore on. The summit stretched over days. In that time, Jaime found fleeting moments to speak with Brienne. Sometimes she stood behind him, silent and watchful as lords bickered. Other times she conferred with him in the corridor, reminding him of certain moral imperatives. "If you want them to trust you," she said softly, "then you must do more than speak. Show your willingness to help their people." He considered her words. During a lull in the talks, he announced that the crown would allocate funds, what little remained in the royal coffers, to rebuild roads and granaries in the war-torn areas of the Riverlands, the North, and the Reach. This was met with cautious approval. Next, he offered to open King's Landing's gates to trade caravans from Dorne, re-establishing the old pacts that Cersei had severed. A Martell cousin nodded approval, though he made it clear Dorne would never again bow. And so a shape of compromise emerged. The North would remain part of the Seven Kingdoms in name, but function with near-total autonomy, paying a modest tax to the Iron Throne in exchange for mutual defense. The Vale and the Stormlands would accept Jaime's reign if he respected their local governance. Dorne insisted on minimal involvement but agreed to trade. The Reach under Tarly remained uneasy but recognized the stability of the realm was tied to not fracturing further. They took days refining the details, haggling over lines of authority, taxes, and treaties. Jaime did not expect them to trust him overnight. But a framework for peace began to form. During one of these nights, long after the negotiations had paused, Jaime found himself unable to sleep. He wandered the corridors of Riverrun, memories of his siege echoing in his mind. He recalled the parley with Edmure on these very stones, how he had threatened to catapult Edmure's infant son over the castle walls if they didn't surrender. It shamed him now, the man he had been then, desperate, cold, shaped by Cersei's ruthless influence. He passed a narrow balcony overlooking the moonlit waters of the Red Fork. The sound of gentle lapping against the stone walls soothed him. There he saw Brienne, leaning against the parapet, staring at the rippling reflections of the moon. He turned as he approached, her expression unreadable in the silver light. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked softly. He shrugged. "I keep thinking of everything that needs doing, how fragile this peace might be, and the past haunts me." She nodded as if understanding. For a moment, silence enveloped them. Then she spoke. "You're different than when I last saw you in King's Landing. Even then, I saw changes in you from the man I first met." He managed a wry smile. "You changed me, Brienne. You and, well, losing my hand changed me, the war changed me, the things I've done." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Killing Cersei changed me." Her eyes flicked downward. "I'm sorry it came to that." "So am I," he whispered. "But I don't regret it, not anymore." She was going to burn the city if it meant clinging to power. She would have unleashed wildfire on children, on innocents. "I saw the same madness I once ended in the Mad King. So I ended it again." Brienne's jaw tightened. "It was the right thing," she said, though her tone was heavy. "I just wish it hadn't needed to happen that way." He exhaled, leaning on the parapet beside her. He caught the scent of her sweat, metal, a faint trace of soap. No perfume, no cloying flower oils. He found that comforting. "Thank you for believing me," he murmured, even without all the details. She looked at him, and in her eyes he saw a spark of something: affection, longing, maybe sorrow. "I've seen you at your worst, Lannister. And I've seen glimpses of something better. I think you can be that better man if you try." He fought the urge to reach for her hand. They were alone, but he was the king and she was a knight. Still, the memory of their fleeting intimacy seized him. The knowledge that if circumstances were kinder, he might have chosen her over everything else. He said nothing, just let his gaze linger. In that pregnant moment of shared quiet, the night air felt charged. He wanted to ask her to stay in King's Landing once this was over to help him rule justly. But words failed him. She straightened. "We should get some rest," she said. "Tomorrow the final negotiations will conclude. Best not to face them half-dead." He dipped his head in agreement and they parted. But as he walked away, he felt a sense of calm in his chest that he hadn't known since Cersei's death. Perhaps a sliver of hope for something beyond redemption, maybe a chance at real companionship built not on lies and cruelty but on respect. The final day of the summit arrived. Sansa Stark sat at the high table, shoulders squared, her face set in quiet determination. Jaime faced her across the table. Edmure Tully presided as a host, though he seemed more like a mediator now, trying to guide them to a resolution. Representatives from the Vale, the Reach, the Stormlands, and Dorne all filed in, each wearing the marks of their house. A hush fell as Sansa spoke. "We have negotiated for days, and many of us have come to terms with a delicate balance of power. The North will not forget the past, but we will not seek to avenge it through more bloodshed. If you, King Jaime, will affirm the North's right to govern itself, keep its own lords, and manage its own defense, we will remain part of your 7 kingdoms in name. That is the compromise." Jaime nodded slowly. "I accept those terms so long as the North does not raise arms against the crown. The Iron Throne will remain a symbol of unity, and we will come to your aid if an external threat arises." She glanced at her brother, Bran, who sat quietly. He stared at Jaime with an otherworldly calm that made Jaime's spine tingle. Then Sansa inclined her head. "Then let us sign the agreement in the sight of men and gods." She stood, and so did Jaime. The rest of the lords rose. A parchment was brought forth detailing the main points of this new arrangement. One by one, they inscribed their names, or set their seals upon the wax. Sansa pressed the direwolf seal of House Stark. Jaime pressed the lion seal of House Lannister. One after another, the others followed. Dorne, the Vale, the Stormlands, the Reach, even Edmure Tully, representing the Riverlands. A sense of finality settled over the chamber. It was not quite the forging of a grand alliance, but it was an uneasy peace. As Sansa said, "May the gods help us all keep it." By evening, the delegations began making preparations to depart. The North's retinue was the first to ready their wagons and horses, eager to head home before the roads grew impassable. Jaime stood in Riverrun's courtyard, bidding each group farewell, wishing them safe travels. Lord Tarly gave him a nod. The Martell cousins bowed stiffly. Robin Arryn gave an awkward farewell. Finally, Sansa approached with her personal guard. Behind her was her brother, Bran, seated in a wheeled chair, and a few northern bannermen. Brienne stood off to the side, not sure if she belonged with Jaime or with the Northerners. Sansa regarded Jaime with a measured expression. "I never thought I'd see the day when a Lannister king would willingly give the North this much freedom." Jaime shrugged. "I never thought I'd be a king at all. Perhaps that has made me less stubborn." She almost smiled. A wisp of kindness touched her face. "My lord, your grace, I see that you are not the same man who stood by during Joffrey's cruelties. If you can keep the peace, the North will remember." He gave a slight bow. "May the gods grant us a future where memory does not lead to vengeance." She nodded, then hesitated. "Brienne," she said, turning to the taller woman, "are you coming north with us?" Brienne glanced at Jaime, then back at Sansa. A moment of silence passed, heavy with meaning. "I will remain at King Jaime's side for now," she said. "I believe my duty is to help secure this peace and protect those who strive for it." Sansa studied Brienne's face, then inclined her head respectfully. "You have my thanks for everything you've done in service to House Stark." Then she lifted Bran's reins, guiding her brother's horse. The northern group departed, their banners of the dire wolf waving in the cold wind until they vanished beyond the castle walls. Jaime let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The courtyard was quiet save for a few guards and stable hands. Brienne stood a short distance away, uncertain. He turned to her. "You stayed," he said, as if that fact surprised him more than anything else. She shrugged, a faint flush on her cheeks. "The North is in good hands. Lady Sansa does not need me as much as she once did." "And you," she exhaled. "This realm needs every good sword it can muster if it's to rebuild. If I can help keep you honest, maybe that's enough." His throat felt tight, gratitude mingling with a cautious joy. "I'm glad," he murmured. "I need someone who will tell me truths I don't want to hear. I trust you to do that." Her lips twitched in something like a smile. "Then I will. Count on it." They stood there a moment longer, letting the cold wind swirl around them. Jaime looked up at the battlements of Riverrun, feeling the strangeness of being here as a peacemaker instead of a conqueror. He turned back to Brienne, noticing how the sinking sun caught strands of her hair. "Tomorrow we return to King's Landing," he said. "To the throne I never wanted. Will you ride with me?" She tilted her head. "Yes, Jaime," she said, dropping the formal address. "I will ride with you." The journey back was fraught with the same cold roads and battered villages, but Jaime felt a measure of relief. They had accomplished something at Riverrun. A fragile peace, a chance to let the kingdom heal. The real challenge would come when he returned to the capital and had to enforce the new terms, quell any lingering dissent, and ensure the realm survived the winter. Still, he allowed himself a moment of respite, riding beside Brienne in companionable silence. Sometimes at night they would speak quietly near the campfire, discussing fortifications or what it meant to serve a kingdom after so many years of betrayal. She asked him once, "Do you think, when you return to that Iron Throne, you'll be the king you wish you could be?" He chuckled, a low, tired sound. "I doubt there is such a thing as being the king I wish. But I'll try to be the king the realm needs." She nodded, satisfied with that answer for the moment. When they finally saw the walls of King's Landing rising in the distance, Jaime felt a knot form in his stomach. The city was his responsibility now. And in the Red Keep, in that cursed throne room, he would rule. But maybe, just maybe, he would rule differently than his sister or the kings before her. The gates opened, revealing that Tyrion had managed to maintain order in their absence. Repairs continued on damaged sections of the city. The markets bustled, albeit quietly. As Jaime and his retinue passed, some small folk paused to watch. He wondered if word of the peace summit had reached them. Perhaps in time they would see signs of improvement, but for now they still bore the scars of the past. Tyrion awaited them in the courtyard of the Red Keep, wearing a thick black cloak against the cold. He offered Jaime a curt bow, then turned to Brienne with a polite nod. "You've come back in one piece," Tyrion observed. "And with the same number of heads? Remarkable. How did the negotiations go?" Jaime sighed. "We have a tenuous peace. The North will govern itself, the other regions keep their claims, but we remain a single realm in name. Time will tell if it holds." Tyrion let out a breath that was almost laughter. "Well, that's better than I would have hoped for, considering the state of things. Welcome home, then." Home. The word sounded strange. Jaime felt a pang as he dismounted, gazing up at the Red Keep's walls. This place was a prison of sorts, but it was also where he would have to make his stand. He was king now. He had a realm to guide out of ruin, a city to feed, alliances to maintain, and a fragile trust to earn. Yet he was not alone. Tyrion at his side, Brienne too. Even some of the lords seemed willing to give him a chance. They climbed the steps into the keep. Servants bustled about, though they seemed less fearful than before. Jaime's footsteps echoed as he made his way to the throne room, that vast chamber with pillars and a vaulted ceiling. The Iron Throne loomed at the far end, a silhouette of twisted metal. He paused, letting his gaze linger on the floor where Cersei had died. The stains had been scrubbed away, but he could still see it in his memory. Brienne came to stand behind him, silent. He felt her presence steadying him. Tyrion cleared his throat, shifting on his feet. "Shall we get to work, Your Grace?" he asked gently. Jaime swallowed, then nodded. He strode forward and ascended the dais. The throne was just as cold and unyielding as he remembered. Settling onto the seat of metal swords, he felt the weight of the new crown, a simpler circlet, pressing down on him. He gazed over the empty hall, remembering how it had been the night he killed Cersei, filled with shock and tension. Now it felt open, as if waiting to see what sort of king he would become. He placed his golden hand on the throne's armrest. The metal chilled him. "Summon the small council," he said to Tyrion. "We have a realm to rebuild." Tyrion bowed and left to gather them. Brienne remained, standing at the foot of the dais, ever watchful. Jaime exhaled. He was a king by chance, by necessity, by the guilt and love that drove him to end his sister's tyranny. Now he must prove himself worthy of that seat, or the realm would tear itself apart. A faint memory rose in his mind, the day he had knelt to receive his white cloak, full of pride and youth, believing he could be the greatest knight in history. It was a dream shattered by betrayal, blood, and heartbreak. But perhaps in this new mantle of kingship he might find a path to serve the realm in ways he never could as a broken knight. It would not wash away his sins, but it might prevent future tragedies. He sat there, in a hall where the voices of centuries past seemed to whisper warnings. And he listened, resolved to be different from the tyrants he had slain. He was Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer and Queenslayer both, but he was also the man who dared to hope for peace even if it cost him everything. Beyond the throne room doors, the city stirred with the next day's promise. A new wind blew in from Blackwater Bay, carrying the scents of salt and cinders. In that swirl of fate, the lion in gold sat, determined to be a king neither feared nor reviled, but one who might shepherd his people through the long winter's night. And in that fragile hope, for the first time in many years, Jaime Lannister felt almost like the knight he had once aspired to be. The morning sun crept across the polished floor of the throne room, sending thin beams of light skittering over the twisted metal of the Iron Throne. Jaime sat at the apex of the dais, a single figure in red and gold, the crown upon his brow feeling heavier by the day. The hush of dawn wrapped around the Red Keep in those moments before the small council arrived to begin their day's business. And as he waited, he could still feel the ghost of Cersei at his back, the memory of her presence so vivid that it prickled the hair on his neck. He had told himself many times that he would not let such haunting recollections sway him. Cersei was gone, that chapter closed, and he had ended it himself. Yet, in the silent stretches of early morning, when the shadows were long and the swirl of duty had not yet overwhelmed him, the shape of her loss returned. Sometimes he heard the echo of her laugh. Other times, he recalled the trembling moment her eyes widened in betrayal and realization. In that final heartbeat before the blade slipped home, he breathed in through his nose, steadying himself. It was no use to dwell on that image. He had done what needed doing for the sake of the realm, just as he had once done with Aerys Targaryen. Heavy doors groaned open at the far end of the hall, and a handful of men and women filed in. Tyrion led them, clad in a dark doublet embroidered with subtle gold threads that caught the morning light. His mismatched eyes swept the room, flicked once over Jaime as if to gauge his mood, and then he took up a position at the foot of the dais. Lord Brayton, Master of Whispers, followed in a swirl of subdued black velvet, and then came Grand Maester Balabar with his chain of many metals gleaming around his neck. Ser Meryn Wills, who had survived the wars and now served as one of the King's Guard, stationed himself near the throne's base. Finally, Brienne entered. She wore the simplest armor, steel gleaming from a fresh polish, and her sapphire cloak draped from her broad shoulders. She nodded once to Jaime, her gaze forthright, and took up a protective post behind Tyrion, her palm resting lightly on the pommel of her sword. Jaime felt the smallest swell of reassurance at her presence. He gave a short nod in return, then cleared his throat. "Good morning," he said, his voice echoing on stone. "I trust you all have had some rest, because we have no shortage of problems to address." Tyrion's wry tone carried up the dais. "Rest is for those with fewer responsibilities, dear brother. But yes, we are here and ready to pick at the bones of the realm's troubles." A faint smile touched Jaime's lips. He shifted in the throne, feeling its cold metal press against the mail under his tunic. "Very well. Let us begin. Grand Maester, you mentioned in your last report that an illness was spreading through Flea Bottom. Have there been any developments?" Balabar stepped forward, clearing his throat with a rasp. He was younger than some of the old Grand Maesters had been, but the weight of his chain gave him a scholarly gravity. "Yes, your grace. The sickness appears to be a fever of the lungs. It afflicts the poorest, especially children. Our supplies of medicinal herbs are limited, and the city's finances." Tyrion spoke up. "I've already authorized the purchase of additional medicines from Essos, though the crown's coffers are dangerously low. We may need to do something more drastic if we're to keep the city from erupting in a full-blown plague." Jaime listened with a pensive frown. The city's gold had been largely squandered over the course of multiple wars and Cersei's extravagances. He had no illusions that a quick fix existed. Still, if disease raged, it would undermine any stability he was trying to build. "Find the money," he said at last. "We'll cut back on court luxuries if we have to. It won't be popular with the courtiers, but I'd sooner save the people than keep us drowning in feasts and silks." "An unorthodox approach for a Lannister," Tyrion murmured with a fleeting grin. "But I second the motion." Balabar bowed, relief evident in his lined brow. "Then I will send word immediately that we can procure more supplies. However, we should also consider setting up proper quarantine areas. The High Septon's men might help see to the sick. In times past, the faith has provided shelter for the afflicted." Jaime's lips thinned in distaste at the mention of the faith, remembering how fanatically the Sparrows had once seized power in King's Landing. But that was the past. The faith's new High Septon seemed more moderate, and alliances needed forging, not breaking. "Yes, coordinate with the faith if they'll assist. Keep me informed if the disease worsens." He inclined his head to Lord Brayton next. The man had a thin, fox-like face, hair parted neatly, and an uncanny ability to sniff out gossip. Lord Brayton, you said you had word of possible unrest in the Stormlands? Brayton pressed his fingertips together. Yes, your grace. The Stormlands are unsettled. The Lesser Lords do not trust your ascension, and some recall that House Baratheon once held the throne. A few whisper about Gendry Baratheon, formerly Gendry Waters, who was legitimized by Queen Daenerys Targaryen, or so rumor claims. He's forging a new keep somewhere near the ruins of Storm's End. He hasn't openly claimed the crown, but talk spreads. Tyrion raised an eyebrow. We once considered Gendry an ally of necessity when Daenerys Targaryen was in power. That was short-lived, given all that happened after. If he's building a following, do we have any sense of his intentions? Brayton shrugged. He's a blacksmith by trade, not a politician. Some say he's just happy to secure a place for himself. Others think he might be a pawn for discontented Storm Lords who want to cast off Lannister rule. Jaime tapped a finger against the throne's iron arm. If he's not seeking the throne, I won't provoke him. The realm is tired of war, and I have no interest in snuffing out every rumor of a rival. But keep an eye on the Stormlands. If Gendry needs recognition, we might formalize his claim to Storm's End if it keeps him loyal, like Sansa in the north, a local lord who can govern but acknowledges the Iron Throne in name. Tyrion nodded, faint approval in his look. That might be the wisest course, yes. A strong hand with a velvet glove, as our father would say. Albeit with fewer death threats. Jaime's voice softened. Yes. Fewer death threats. They continued the discussion, bouncing from topic to topic, the repairs of the city gates, the status of trade caravans from Dorne, the shipments of grain from the Reach. All of it hammered home how precariously balanced the kingdom was. Jaime felt each topic land on his shoulders like an added weight, forging a chain of responsibility that threatened to pull him under. Once the session concluded, he OD from the throne, massaging the tension from his neck. Tyrion lingered. Brother, he said quietly, you'll meet with the High Septon soon about that matter of the Faith's assistance. Do you want me present? Jaime glanced at Brienne, who was listening from a short distance. Yes, come with me. I'd rather not face the High Septon alone. The Faith has its uses, but I do not trust them entirely. And after what happened under the Sparrows, can you blame me? Tyrion pursed his lips. No, I cannot. Let's hope this High Septon is more malleable. The group disbanded. Grand Maester Balabar and Lord Brayton departed, leaving Jaime, Tyrion, and Brienne in the vast throne room. The morning sun had grown stronger, illuminating drifting motes of dust in the air. Jaime felt the dryness in his mouth. He consumed nothing but a quick gulp of watered wine at dawn. Brienne stepped forward. Your Grace, you should eat before your next engagement. It will be a long day. Her voice was gentle but firm, and Jaime recognized that certain unwavering sincerity he'd seen in her countless times before. He gave her a weary smile. A good idea. I suppose kings can't rule on an empty stomach. He gestured for Tyrion to follow. Let's head to the Solar. We'll break our fast and prepare for the High Septon. They moved through the corridors of the Red Keep, passing guards who saluted stiffly. Servants scurried out of their path, bowing low. Jaime was still not accustomed to the way they cast their eyes downward as if fearing to meet his gaze. Before, in his golden youth, he had relished the admiring stares, but that was when he was Jaime Lannister, the Golden Knight. Now he was Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer twice over, the man who had murdered both king and queen. The small folk might quake at the idea of crossing him, but he saw wariness in their eyes rather than admiration. They reached a smaller dining solar that overlooked the city's sprawl. The table there was laid with simple fare, fresh bread, boiled eggs, a plate of salted fish, and a flagon of watered wine. Jaime and Tyrion settled onto benches while Brienne remained standing nearby, watchful. He waved a hand. Sit if you wish. We're hardly in the Hall of 100 Thrones. She hesitated but complied, lowering herself onto a bench with the same careful grace she used when handling a sword. Tyrion poured wine into cups for them. Jaime took one and inhaled the faint tang of grape. To a day of not having the city burned down around us, Tyrion offered dryly, raising his cup. Jaime snorted but clinked cups. Brienne only shook her head. A grim toast, she commented. Tyrion shrugged. Sometimes a grim toast is all we can manage, my lady. Better a grim peace than a cheery war. You, of all people, know how fragile our situation is. Brienne nodded, letting the matter drop, and helped herself to a chunk of bread. They ate in relative silence for a few moments, the tension unspoken but heavy. Jaime sipped his wine, his gaze drifting through the window to the harbor. He could see a few battered merchant ships anchored there, remnants of what had once been a thriving trade center before the wars. The city was slowly recovering, but it would take time to rebuild that lost prosperity. He turned to Tyrion. After this meeting with the High Septon, we should send a formal invitation to Gendry. See if he'll come to the capital and negotiate. And I want to get word to Lady Sansa as well, updating her on the matter with the Stormlands. It's best she isn't taken by surprise. Tyrion finished chewing a bite of fish and nodded. As you say, though it might be prudent to deal with that quietly. Some old nobles in King's Landing may resent the idea of a legitimized bastard holding Storm's End. Especially if they recall how Robert Baratheon took the crown. Jaime shrugged. Let them resent it. If it spares us another rebellion, it's worth the risk. Brienne set her cup down. I'd like to suggest sending me as an envoy if Gendry is reluctant to come here. I know the roads and my presence might reassure him that we're not setting a trap. The idea appealed to Jaime, though the thought of her leaving the capital left a strange hollowness in his chest. He realized that he depended on her steadfast honesty more than he cared to admit. Let's see if he's willing to travel. If not, yes, you could ride to Storm's End. I would be grateful for your help. She inclined her head. Very well. They finished their meal. Jaime rose, readjusting the circlet on his brow, and Tyrion followed suit. The High Septon would be waiting in a small audience chamber. Outside the solar, the corridors were busy now with the day's bustle, scullions carrying baskets of bread, guards in Lannister livery patrolling, a steward hurrying with a roll of parchment. The castle still bore the marks of the recent wars, scorch marks on certain walls, broken tiles that had yet to be replaced. But day by day, the worst of the rubble was cleared away and some new sense of order emerged. They arrived at the appointed audience chamber, a modest space that had once been used for lesser lords to petition the crown. In the center, perched on a plain wooden bench, was the High Septon, robed in fine white cloth embroidered with gold thread to represent the seven. His hair was silver, his face thin, and an air of gentle piety surrounded him, though Jaime had learned not to trust appearances. 2 Septons stood behind him, heads bowed. A handful of gold-cloaked guards lined the walls, stiff at attention. Jaime strode inside, Tyrion at his right, Brienne behind. The High Septon stood and bowed deeply. Your Grace, he said in a soft, measured voice. You honor me with your time. Jaime forced a thin smile, approaching to a comfortable distance. High Septon. I appreciate your willingness to help the city's poor. I trust you received the Grand Maester's requests. The High Septon nodded. I have, Your Grace. The faith stands ready to provide shelter, food, and basic care for those afflicted in Flea Bottom. However, we will need resources. Our septs are not overflowing with coin. If the crown could supply us with additional funds as well as sanction the presence of a few holy sisters to treat the ill, we can make a difference. Jaime steeled himself. We do not have much gold, but we can provide some. I'm willing to release a portion from the royal treasury, though it won't be a lavish sum. Also, in return for the faith's help, I want your assurance that you won't use this to bolster your own influence. I recall too well how the faith militants seized power under the previous High Sparrow. The High Septon kept his expression serene. I am not the man who preceded me, Your Grace. I have no intention of re-establishing the faith militant. The gods teach us mercy, not tyranny. Jaime glanced at Tyrion, who offered a subtle lift of his brows. The sincerity of the High Septon was questionable, but they had little choice. The faith was the only institution with the manpower and structure to provide widespread charity. Very well, Jaime replied. I will sign the necessary writ and you may begin your charitable works. But remember, I will be watching. If the faith tries to meddle in matters of state, I will not tolerate it. The older man folded his hands. Of course, Your Grace. May the seven guide your rule. They exchanged a few more pleasantries, details on how the distribution of supplies would be handled, and then the High Septon departed with a whisper of robes. Jaime watched him go, tension coiling in his chest. He thought of how Cersei had once unleashed wild vengeance on the faith, burning the great September of Baelor and all within. Another monstrous act in a line of them. Now he was in the strange position of forging alliances with the same institution she had destroyed. The realm turned in circles, it seemed. Easier than expected, Tyrion said quietly. Either he's a genuinely devout man or extremely cunning. Possibly both. Brienne added. We'll see if he holds to his word about helping the poor. We can keep watch on his activities. Jaime exhaled. Yes, let's keep watch. For now, that's all we can do. They left the audience chamber and headed into the courtyard to check on the progress of new recruits for the city watch. Another pressing matter. Jaime had decided that while the gold cloaks were essential, too many of them had grown corrupt under previous rulers. He wanted fresh men of decent skill and no loyalty to the old ways of bribes and intimidation. As they passed through a colonnade, half a dozen men in gold cloaks snapped to attention, saluting their king. Jaime returned the salute with his golden hand. The courtyard training area bustled with recruits drilling in formation, sweat glistening on their brows. The City Watch's current commander, a stocky man named Dennis Harlow, approached and bowed. "Your Grace," he said, breath puffing in the cold morning air. "We have about 50 new recruits. Some served in the war, others are farm hands looking for steady coin. We're weeding out the incompetent ones." Jaime nodded, scanning the men. He had once prided himself on his skill with a blade, but he had only one real hand now, and that changed everything. Still, it did not change his ability to judge a fighter's posture or discipline. He saw some potential in the ragged group. "Carry on, Commander. Make sure they know they serve the city's people, not just the crown's will." Harlow gave a slight nod. "Yes, Your Grace. We aim to keep order, not inspire fear." He stepped aside, letting Jaime pass. Tyrion followed with mild curiosity, and Brienne walked in stride, scanning the yard with a trained eye. She occasionally muttered a comment about a recruit's stance or form. They had not been in the courtyard more than a few minutes when a scout from the gates approached at a brisk pace. The man, dusty from travel, bowed low. "Your Grace, my lord," he said, out of breath. "There's a small caravan from the Stormlands requesting entry. They say they come bearing a letter for King Jaime Lannister." Tyrion's eyebrows rose. "From the Stormlands, you say? That was quick. Perhaps Gendry has wasted no time in making his position known." "Bring them in," Jaime ordered. "We'll receive their letter in the Solar." Not long after, a group of 4 travelers arrived at the Red Keep's gates, escorted by the gold cloaks. At the head was a middle-aged knight in battered armor bearing a stag sigil. Though the coloring suggested the device had been updated with a blacksmith's hammer crossing behind it. Beside him rode a younger man with a short beard and keen eyes. They dismounted under the suspicious gaze of the castle guards. Jaime, Tyrion, and Brienne waited in the Solar. 2 of Jaime's Kingsguard stood discreetly by the door, ready to intervene if needed. The men from the Stormlands were shown in, both bowing low in courtesy. Jaime inclined his head. "Welcome to King's Landing. I understand you have a letter from Gendry Baratheon." The older knight spoke. "Ser Rufus Swan, Your Grace." "Yes, I carry a missive from Lord Gendry Baratheon of Storm's End." He seemed uneasy about using Gendry's full title, as if not entirely sure it was legitimate. He presented a parchment sealed with a blob of wax that bore a stag's head. Jaime took it, broke the seal, and unfolded the paper. In a surprisingly neat hand, Gendry's letter read, "To King Jaime of House Lannister, I have heard word of your ascension and the peace you brokered in the Trident. I pray it endures. I make no claim to the Iron Throne. I have no desire to bring further war upon the realm. My folk in the Stormlands have suffered enough. However, my lords and people look to me for leadership, and if the crown would acknowledge my lordship of Storm's End, I would swear to keep peace in the Stormlands and serve the realm as a loyal bannerman, provided we are granted respect and the freedom to rebuild. I request an audience to formalize these terms. Though I am no politician, I understand a realm cannot be united without trust. If you will host me in King's Landing, I will come. If you prefer another meeting place, name it. I do not wish for violence. I only wish for my folk to survive this hard winter in safety. Respectfully, Gendry Baratheon." Jaime lowered the paper, relief stirring inside him. The tone was diplomatic, earnest. "He wants recognition and a chance to live in peace," he murmured. "He doesn't want the throne." Tyrion breathed a low whistle. "Count your blessings. A rebellious Baratheon could have caused us more chaos than we can stomach. This is a gift, brother." Brienne nodded. "He always struck me as straightforward, not one for schemes." Jaime looked to Ser Rufus. "You have traveled far. Has your lord truly consolidated Storm's End under his rule?" Rufus puffed out his cheeks. "Yes, Your Grace. The Storm Lords have accepted him, most of them anyway. Some older houses grumble, but seeing as Lord Gendry is Robert's blood made lawful by royal decree, they've rallied behind him. He's been fair and just by all accounts." "Then I welcome Lord Gendry to King's Landing," Jaime said. "He may come with a small retinue. Let him know we shall treat with him in good faith." He handed the parchment to Tyrion, who folded it carefully. We'll see if we can formalize a pact. Until then, rest here in the city. You and your men are guests. Rufus bowed again, though the tension in his shoulders remained. We thank you, your grace. We'll relay your invitation to Lord Gendry. He will come as soon as the roads allow. After the knight and his companion were dismissed, Tyrion exhaled. Well, that is the best news we've had all day. Perhaps we'll avoid another civil war. Brienne offered a slight smile. It seems you'll have your chance to prove King's Landing can host a lord without a dagger in his back. Jaime grimaced, recalling all too well the tragedies that had occurred in the capital under the Lannisters' watch. Yes. Let's make sure we don't repeat the past. They spent the remainder of the day tending to lesser matters, signing decrees, listening to petitions from minor lords. By the time dusk approached, Jaime's head throbbed. He retired to his private solar, a room that once belonged to the king before Cersei had taken it over. The space was sparse now, stripped of her lavish furniture and scented draperies. He had replaced them with simpler furnishings, a sturdy oaken desk, a table, and a few chairs near the hearth. A battered old tapestry of Lannisport's harbor hung on one wall, a relic from Tywin's day. He threw off his cloak and slumped into a chair by the hearth, letting the heat soak into his weary limbs. He stared at the flames. For an instant, he could almost see glimpses of green wildfire licking among the logs, conjured by memory. He blinked and the vision vanished, leaving him with the more mundane crackle of normal fire. A soft knock sounded on the door. Come, he said, mustering a tired authority. The door opened to reveal Brienne, removing her helmet and tucking it under one arm. Pardon the intrusion, your grace, she began, then paused. Should I come back later? He shook his head. No. Please. He gestured to a seat near the hearth. She hesitated but obliged, the logs casting warm light over her armor. They sat in silence for a few moments, the tension of a long day unspooling slightly. How do you manage this? Brienne asked at last. She didn't clarify what this meant, but Jaime understood, the weight of rule, the memory of everything he had done, the betrayal that defined his place on the throne. He gave a short, humorless laugh. I'm not sure I do manage it. I just go on. Each day, I expect the realm to collapse under me, or for someone to slip a blade between my ribs. Sometimes I wonder if that would be a mercy. Her gaze flickered with concern. Don't speak like that. It's truth, he said quietly. Then, shaking off the dark mood, he lifted his golden hand in a resigned gesture. But perhaps it's also a sign that I'm trying. A man who wanted power for its own sake might not feel so burdened by it. Brienne's stern features softened. You're doing what you must. And it's for the best, I think. No one else is in a position to hold the realm together without bloodshed. Her voice dropped slightly. I never expected to see you rule. I always thought, well, you once told me you were content to be a knight, not a leader. He leaned back, letting the light catch in his uneven hair. That Jaime Lannister died long ago in some ways. Or maybe he's still here, trying to break out of this crown. I don't know. But you're right, I never wanted this. If it hadn't been for Cersei's madness, I'd still be a knight of the King's Guard, or I'd be dead. Or perhaps exiled somewhere. Brienne regarded him quietly. She was your sister, she ventured, her tone gentle. It must have hurt. He closed his eyes briefly, feeling the old ache. Yes, he whispered. I loved her. Probably more than a man should love his sister, but that's the twisted truth. In the end, I realized she would burn the realm if it meant preserving her power. She almost did. I couldn't let it happen again. He opened his eyes, gaze dropping to the flames. I lost her when I stopped enabling her. And in a way, I lost part of myself, too. A poignant silence stretched between them. Brienne set her helmet aside. Sometimes we have to lose parts of ourselves to become something better. You taught me that once, without meaning to. When I first met you, you were arrogant, cruel in your japes. But you saved me from being raped by those men who captured us. And you lost your hand protecting me. You changed. He turned his face to her, a sorrowful smile curving his mouth. I never regretted saving you, he said, voice hushed. Even though it cost me my sword hand. Perhaps it was the best thing I ever did. The air felt charged with memory. She inhaled, then rose to her feet. You're exhausted, your grace. I should let you rest. We have more matters to deal with tomorrow. He wanted to stop her, to say something that might keep her there. But words failed him. So he merely nodded. Yes. Thank you, Brienne. Your counsel means more to me than you know. She bowed stiffly, retrieving her helmet. I'm glad you find it of use. Without further ceremony, she turned and left. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving Jaime alone with the flickering shadows. He leaned forward, propping his forehead on his flesh and blood hand, feeling the cool metal of the golden one tug at his wrist. A swirl of conflicting emotion welled in his chest. Guilt for the life he had led, relief that he was trying to atone, and a subtle yearning for the companionship Brienne offered. He wondered if that was something a king could afford, or if his entire life was now consumed by duty. He wondered if, in the end, it would matter. Eventually, he moved to his bedchamber to snatch what few hours of sleep he could. The night brought dreams, visions of wildfire, screams, and glimpses of a child's laughter. He awoke before dawn, drenched in sweat, the taste of ash in his mouth. He dressed quickly, donning simpler garments beneath a fur-lined cloak. A king had duties at all hours, and today, he would greet a new wave of merchants from Pentos hoping to re-establish trade ties. Tyrion had arranged the meeting at midday, but Jaime wanted to walk the streets first, to see King's Landing as it truly was rather than relying on reports. He took only a small escort of gold cloaks, along with Brienne. She met him in the courtyard as the pale morning sky brightened to a frosty blue, single red sun cresting the horizon. "You'll go in plain clothes?" she asked, noting how he had hidden his crown beneath his cloak. "Yes," he replied. "I'm not trying to be incognito, everyone knows my face, but I don't want a royal parade. I just want to see the city." She mounted her mare, adjusting the sword at her hip. "Then let's go." They rode through the city gates, the gold cloaks clearing a path only when the crush of people grew too thick. The streets were muddy from recent rains, and the stench of refuse mingled with the salt tang of the harbor. Vendors hawked their wares, though their stalls were meager: wilted vegetables, a few salted fish, questionable lumps of meat. Beggars sat with bowls, calling out to passers-by. Jaime noticed the pallor of their skin, the hollowness of their eyes, and realized the city was still deeply impoverished. War had drained the life from this place, and Cersei's tyranny had done little to improve matters. He tried not to let guilt paralyze him. He steered his horse carefully around a group of ragged children. One shouted, "King Jaime! King Jaime!" The child's voice trembled between awe and fear. Others stared in silent wonder. Jaime caught the glimmer of hope in a few eyes, but mostly he saw confusion. They had known so many kings these last few years, each one promising salvation. Most had brought only more suffering. A vendor woman, older and stooped, recognized him. She performed a trembling curtsy, nearly dropping her basket of shriveled apples. "Your Grace," she whispered. "Bless you, bless you." He felt uncomfortable under the weight of her gratitude because he did not know what exactly she was thanking him for. He had not yet improved her life in any tangible way. Brienne and the gold cloaks maintained a protective perimeter, though the small folk kept a respectful distance. Jaime led them deeper into Flea Bottom, the warren of twisting alleys that housed the city's poorest. He found more devastation there: half-collapsed shacks, a suspicious greenish scum coating the edges of the rivulets of sewage. A few men coughed and hacked, spitting dark phlegm on the ground. This was the sickness Balabar had mentioned. Jaime felt his stomach tighten. He dismounted in front of a rundown building that might have once been a potshop. The gold cloaks hovered anxiously, but he waved them away. "I just want to see inside," he said. "Stay alert." Brienne followed him as he stepped through the crooked doorway. Inside, the air was stale, smelling of sickness and sweat. A handful of cots lined the walls, each occupied by a suffering soul. A younger septon moved among them, offering water and thin broth. The man looked up, startled to see the king. He hastily bowed. "Your Grace," he stammered. I did not expect you." The high septon said aid would be coming, but we are low on supplies. His voice trembled between respect and desperation. Jaime approached one of the cots. The occupant was a woman with sunken cheeks, her face gleaming with fever sweat. She gazed at him through half-lidded eyes, delirious. He touched her forehead with his flesh hand, feeling the heat radiating from her. He frowned, turning back to the septon. "Her name?" he asked quietly. "Tess," the septon supplied. "She's got 3 children at home, sick too." Jaime's jaw tightened. He glanced at Brienne, who stood behind him, arms folded in concern. "We'll do more," he murmured, half to himself. "We'll send more medicines, more healers if we can find them." The septon licked his lips nervously. "Thank you, Your Grace. The faith is doing all we can, but so many are ill. We had to convert this old shop into a makeshift infirmary." Jaime squeezed the woman's hand gently, though she seemed barely conscious. "Hold on, Tess," he said. "Help is coming." He turned away, his throat tight, and exited. Outside, he inhaled the rancid air of Flea Bottom, wishing it felt fresher than the stench of sickness within. The sight of that fever-stricken mother had shaken him. The realm's greatest threat was not an army or a mad queen now, it was poverty, disease, and hunger. Battles were simpler, he thought. You knew the enemy, you swung your sword. This was a slow, grinding tragedy with no single foe. Brienne read the turmoil on his face. We'll step up efforts, she said quietly. Balabar can train more healers, the High Septon can deploy more septas. If the city sees you're serious about helping them. We are serious, he replied, voice rasping. But sincerity alone won't cure them. We need resources, coin, medicine, time. He fought the urge to swear viciously at how powerless he felt. Let's return to the keep. We have a meeting with merchants soon. Maybe we can arrange for shipments of supplies from Pentos. They mounted again, and their small party wound back toward the upper city, passing through the gate that separated Flea Bottom from the more respectable districts. The difference in wealth was stark. Once through the gate, the streets were cleaner, the buildings sturdier. They climbed toward the Red Keep, the walls looming like a fortress of old regrets. Outside the main gates, Jaime spied a fresh retinue arriving. He recognized the swirl of silver and blue cloaks marking men of the Vale. A tall, narrow-shouldered youth near the front had to be Lord Robin Arryn. Though his age was creeping up, he was no longer a child, but he still had that pallid, uncertain air. Tyrion had mentioned that the Vale was sending a delegation to finalize trade negotiations. Jaime wondered if the young lord had the backbone to manage it. Regardless, he would do his duty and greet them. But first, they stabled their horses. Jaime and Brienne made for the audience chamber. Along the way, Tyrion intercepted them with an exasperated look. Where have you been, dear king? Our Pentoshi friends have arrived, and they're quite anxious to discuss the terms of a renewed shipping lane. We're supposed to meet them in half an hour. Jaime's head throbbed again. I needed to see Flea Bottom, he said shortly. We must do more. Tyrion nodded, though a flash of something like sympathy crossed his face. I understand. But remember, it's not all on your shoulders to fix in a day. Jaime bit back a retort. He knew Tyrion was trying to reassure him, but the magnitude of the realm's ills weighed heavily indeed. Instead, he gestured for Tyrion and Brienne to follow. Let's not keep the Pentoshi waiting. They found a small group of Pentoshi traders in the waiting hall. The leader introduced himself as Magister Abrazzo, a slender man with oiled curls and an ornate mustache. He bowed deeply, an ingratiating smile plastered on his face. Jaime offered a polite nod, and they proceeded into the audience chamber. The Pentoshi had brought samples of fine silks and spices as gifts, presumably trying to open the door to favorable trade agreements. Tyrion's eyes lit up at the sight of saffron, peppercorns, and cloth of gold, all reminders of the wealth across the narrow sea. Magister Abrazzo launched into a flowery greeting. King Jaime, a delight, an absolute honor. Pentos remembers the days when King's Landing was a thriving port, and we yearn to see trade flourish again. We bring you these humble tokens of goodwill, trusting we might find new partnerships. Jaime tried to keep his exhaustion from showing. We appreciate your gifts, Magister. I understand you wish to reopen shipping lanes that fell into disuse during the wars. Abrazzo touched his chest theatrically. Just so, your grace. Our ships can deliver grain, salted meats, as well as spices and other luxuries, if the crown is open to reducing certain tariffs. In exchange, we can pay in gold or in goods that the capital might need. Tyrion rubbed his chin, glancing at Jaime. A reduction in tariffs could stimulate the city's economy, brother. But we have to ensure we're not giving away too much. We need coin for the city's welfare. Magister Abrazzo flashed another smile. We can negotiate those terms. Perhaps a moderate lowering of the import tax with special exceptions for essential supplies. And in return, Pentos would encourage other free cities to trade here as well. They debated for the better part of an hour, with Jaime's attention wavering between the details of coin values and the haunting image of that sick woman, Tess. He forced himself to focus. If Pentos brought in more supplies, it could help feed the city. The question was whether they could afford to waive taxes that might fund the city's rebuilding. In the end, Jaime struck a compromise. They would reduce tariffs on certain imports, grain, healing herbs, and building materials, while leaving others unchanged. The Pentoshi could sell their luxury items but would pay higher duties on them. Magister Abrazzo seemed content enough, seeing that he could still profit while the crown gained access to vital supplies. They sealed the agreement with handshakes and promised to draft the official documents. When the Pentoshi finally departed, Tyrion reclined in his chair, letting out a theatrical sigh. And thus we dip a toe back into trade with Essos. Let's hope it doesn't bite us. Jaime rose, shaking out his shoulders. We have little choice. We need the supplies. And with the realm so depleted, we can't rely solely on the Reach for everything. He cast a glance to Brienne, who had quietly observed the negotiations, ready to step in if tensions rose. What do you think? She gave a shrug. I'm no expert in trade, Your Grace. But if they bring in medicine and food, that's a boon. Indeed, Jaime said. We should formalize these terms as soon as possible. Tyrion, see that the scribes get to work. I'm heading to the small council chamber to look over a map of the city. See where we can set up more infirmaries. Tyrion stretched his arms overhead. I'll join you shortly. I need a moment to confirm a few other matters with the Master of Coin. Go on. Jaime and Brienne left the audience chamber. They strode through the red keep's corridors, the warmth of afternoon sun filtering through narrow windows. An abrupt thought intruded on Jaime's mind. Gendry's arrival. He would soon have to host the newly minted Lord Baratheon and formalize an oath. Another challenge, though hopefully a simpler one than some. As they made a turn toward the council chamber, a page hurried up to them, breathless. Your Grace, the boy said, eyes wide. You're needed in the courtyard at once. It's a body, Your Grace. Someone's pinned a note to him with a dagger. The guards say you should see it. Jaime's stomach lurched. A body? Who? The page shook his head, trembling. We don't know, but it's not pretty, Your Grace. Jaime glanced at Brienne, who tensed. Show us, he said, dread crawling down his spine. They followed the page to the courtyard just outside the main stables, where a small knot of gold cloaks had gathered. In the center, a limp figure hung from a post. Jaime's breath caught at the gruesome sight. The dead man wore tattered rags, dried blood crusted around his mouth, and his eyes bulged in final terror. A dagger pinned a parchment to his chest. The handle was plain, and the blade glistened with old gore. Who found him? Jaime asked, forcing himself to approach the corpse. The stench made him recoil, but he had seen far worse on battlefields. One of the gold cloaks saluted. A stable boy saw him this morning. We think he was placed here during the night. The gates were locked, but someone must have scaled the walls or bribed a guard. Jaime frowned. He reached out with his golden hand, hooking the parchment's edge. Brienne pressed closer, alert. He tried to pull the note free without dislodging too much gore. The dagger slid out of the wood with a sickening scrape. Jaime handed the parchment to Brienne so she could read it with him. The writing was scrawled in a rough hand. A gift for the Kingslayer who calls himself king. He may hide behind gold and fancy words, but the ghosts of his sins will come to collect what's owed. No signature, only a smeared blot of ink at the bottom. Jaime's heart pounded. Whoever did this wants to send a message, he muttered. To remind me that I'm not loved by all. Brienne's joy tightened. They murdered a man just to deliver a threat. We don't even know who this man is, Jaime said, voice low with anger. He had the victim's face twisted in agony. Likely a poor wretch killed for the sake of intimidation. A man with no name used as a message. I won't stand for it. He turned to the gold cloaks. Take the body down carefully. Have the maester examine it. I want to know if there's any clue who might have done this. Put out word that we're seeking information. Discreetly. No need to so panic, but I want answers. The guards obeyed, gingerly lowering the corpse. Brienne stood beside Jaime, her expression dark. This is more than a personal threat. They want to spark fear. Show you that the city isn't entirely under your control. Jaime sighed, a knot of tension coiling beneath his ribs. So be it. We'll find them. But keep this quiet. Let's see if our Master of Whispers can uncover anything. She nodded, scanning the courtyard as if expecting an assassin to leap from the shadows. He sensed the same tension in her that he felt in himself. Even with the wars ended, the realm was far from peaceful. For a moment, he recalled how he had once scorned the idea of living in fear. But now that he held the throne, such dangers were daily reality. They left the courtyard as the guards shooed away curious onlookers. Jaime's steps felt heavier with each stride. Another problem, he thought. Another sign that perhaps the city was a tinderbox waiting for a spark. The old king in him, once just a man who had served kings, knew that these small incitements could spiral into greater unrest if not handled properly. Inside the small council chamber, Tyrion was already waiting, frowning at a scroll. He looked up as Jaime and Brienne entered, catching sight of their grim expressions. What's happened? Jaime told him, Tyrion pursed his lips, then exhaled. We'll see if Lord Brayton can track anything. It could be a lone madman or it could be a group. Gods know we have plenty of enemies, from fanatics who supported Cersei to those who hated your father. Could be an old grudge from the War of the Five Kings. Jaime sat heavily in the chair at the head of the table. It's a reminder, that's all. I am not a beloved king. I'm barely tolerated by some. I can't let it consume me. I have a realm to run. Tyrion nodded, pulling out a fresh piece of parchment. Then let's continue as planned. Show the realm we will not be cowed. In time, perhaps you'll gain enough goodwill that such threats fade. Or we'll find the culprits and remove them. Either way, we move forward. Jaime forced a half-smile. Let's hope so. Now, about these infirmaries. They resumed their discussions, though the specter of the dead man in the courtyard lingered in Jaime's mind. He realized that every step forward might be met with a dagger in the back. He was determined not to be paralyzed by fear, but he knew too well how fragile a king's life could be. For the next fortnight, the city settled into an uneasy routine. Fleet Bottom's sickness raged on, but the new shipments from Pentos began trickling in, bringing some relief in the form of healing herbs and additional food. The faith sent more septas and novices to tend to the sick, and the number of makeshift infirmaries grew. Jaime allocated coin as best he could, though the treasury threatened to run dry. Tyrion juggled finances with the exasperation of a man playing an unwinnable dice game. Still, incremental progress was made. Lord Robin Arryn, timid though he was, stayed a few days to discuss the Vale's trade routes. He left after signing some minor agreements, escorted by a cadre of knights who seemed more prepared than he was to defend the Vale's interests. After he departed, the castle was left waiting for the next arrival, Gendry Baratheon. Jaime had the kitchens and guest quarters readied, wanting to avoid any slight that might push Gendry away. It was on a crisp, cloudless day that the heralds announced Gendry's approach. Jaime made his way to the courtyard with Tyrion and Brienne in tow. A small group of knights, maybe 15, rode in behind a banner depicting a stag and a hammer crossed behind it. A new sigil, forging Robert's imagery with Gendry's blacksmith heritage. At their head, Gendry himself rode astride a sturdy courser. He was a big man, broad in the shoulders, with dark hair cropped short and a thick beard. His armor bore no fancy gilding. It was plain steel, well-maintained, and reminiscent of a working man's practicality. He dismounted, then approached Jaime and bowed stiffly. "Your Grace." Jaime inclined his head. "Lord Gendry, welcome to King's Landing. I trust your journey went smoothly?" Gendry straightened. "As smoothly as one might expect. The roads near the Windwater are still in poor shape, but I've seen worse. The Stormlands are no strangers to rough roads." Tyrion stepped forward, offering a polite smile. "We appreciate you traveling so far, my lord. Allow us to host you in the Red Keep. We have rooms prepared, food and drink as you wish." Gendry nodded, though he seemed uneasy. "I'm not used to such hospitality, but I won't refuse it. Thank you." Jaime guided him inside, leading him through the halls. Gendry's men followed, eyeing the castle's corridors with guarded curiosity. The fortress still bore scars of past battles, but it was a formidable sight nonetheless. After installing Gendry in a comfortable suite near the castle's southern tower, Jaime gave him time to refresh himself before a formal meeting. Late that afternoon, they assembled in one of the smaller audience chambers, more intimate than the grand throne room. Jaime, Tyrion, Brienne, and a handful of relevant council members took seats around a broad table. Gendry sat opposite Jaime, flanked by two Stormland knights with weathered faces. The tension was mild but present, as if everyone remembered how House Baratheon had once occupied the throne that Jaime now held. Jaime began, "We received your letter, and I appreciate your candor. I understand you want to secure recognition for your claim to Storm's End." Gendry nodded, looking Jaime in the eye. "I do. Queen Daenerys legitimized me, but that was before everything fell apart. Most Stormlords accept me now, but there are those who question my official right to the castle and its lands without the crown's approval." Tyrion spoke up. "You say you do not seek the Iron Throne. You want only to rebuild the Stormlands." Gendry's gaze flicked to Tyrion, then back to Jaime. "That's right. My folks suffered in the wars same as everyone else. Food's scarce, and the lords are restless. My father, Robert Baratheon, left a legacy that's both a blessing and a curse. I can't erase that, but I can try to do better for the Stormlands. Jaime studied the man's earnest face. He saw in Gendry a hint of Robert's robust features, but the blacksmith's calluses on his hands and the quiet grit in his eyes were all his own. I want no more war, Jaime said slowly. If acknowledging you as Lord of Storm's End keeps the peace, I'm willing to do so, provided you swear fealty to the Iron Throne and abide by the same terms as the other great lords. We're forging a new order, one that grants regions more autonomy but maintains unity. Gendry listened intently. That's acceptable. The Stormlands will bow to you, though we hope to manage our own affairs when it comes to rebuilding. He hesitated. Then ventured, I've heard about the arrangements with Lady Sansa Stark, giving her near-total governance in the north. Will my domain have similar freedoms? Jaime and Tyrion exchanged looks. You'll have broad autonomy, Tyrion answered, so long as you pay your taxes and do not raise your banners against the crown without cause. We aim to prevent future conflicts by allowing each region to recover and govern themselves in local matters. The Stormlands will be your responsibility. In turn, if the realm faces an outside threat or if we call the banners to defend the realm as a whole, you are expected to respond. Gendry exhaled, relief showing in his shoulders. That's fair. I can accept that. A ghost of a smile touched Jaime's lips. Then we are in agreement. He paused. I'll ask you to sign a formal oath in front of witnesses. After that, I'll make a royal decree acknowledging you as Lord Gendry Baratheon of Storm's End. Do you have any particular demands or requests beyond that? The big man shook his head. No. Just let us rebuild. If there's trouble or some new war, I'll answer your call. Otherwise, I'd prefer to keep out of politics. Tyrion chuckled. Spoken like a man with sense. You'll find fewer wars that way. A soft knock sounded on the door and a steward entered to announce the evening feast was prepared. Jaime motioned Gendry and the Stormland Knights to rise. Let's continue our talk at table. You're our guest. They moved to a smaller banquet hall. The meal was plain but hearty, roasted game, stewed vegetables, crusty bread. Jaime had insisted on reducing excess spending in the castle, so there were no extravagant courses or fountains of wine. Yet the food was more plentiful than most in the city enjoyed, a reminder of how wide the gap remained between the nobility and the common folk. Still, Gendry seemed more at ease with a simple feast than he might have with a lavish one. As they ate, Tyrion managed the conversation with skill, guiding them through topics of Stormland fortifications, the rumor of bandits near Shipbreaker Bay, and the general condition of Storm's End. Gendry, relaxing under a few cups of ale, told them about how he had repaired the old forges in the castle's undercroft, forging new swords for his knights. I'm no master smith like Tobelmot, he said, but I learned a trick or two. You might find some admirers here, Tyrion said with a twinkle in his eye. The city can always use a quality smith. Gendry's grin faded a bit. I have my duties at Storm's End now. I'll leave the forging to others. But sometimes I miss the work. Shaping metal, seeing it come to life, that was honest labor, simpler in a way. Jaime understood that sentiment more than he cared to admit. Simplicity is a rare luxury for those in power, he said quietly. The evening progressed without incident, and by the time Gendry retired to his chambers, they had reached a clear understanding. In 2 days' time, they would hold a brief ceremony before the Iron Throne to formalize Gendry's lordship. The city was to witness it, another sign that Jaime's reign sought unity rather than conquest. That night, Jaime found himself wandering the Red Keep's ramparts instead of seeking his bed. The moon was high, a pale orb above the city's flickering lights. Below, the rooftops of King's Landing spread in a haphazard tapestry. He imagined, somewhere down there, Tess was still fighting for her life in a makeshift infirmary, or perhaps she was gone. The city was not cured by one day's effort, nor could it be. He rested an arm on the cold stone, the breeze stirring his hair. A slight scrape of metal behind him made him tense, but then he recognized the footfalls. Brienne approached, her broad silhouette distinctive even in moonlight. Couldn't sleep? She asked softly. He shook his head, not looking away from the city. Too many thoughts. I keep running over the negotiations with Gendry, the plague in Flea Bottom, the threats from the unknown killers. It's all endless. She came to stand beside him, gazing out over the walls. You're doing what you can, she said. Better than most kings would. Some might ignore Flea Bottom entirely and focus on pleasing the nobles. He let out a humorless laugh. And some might burn Flea Bottom to the ground if it meant eradicating disease. Cersei might have thought that way. He exhaled. I'm not a saint, but I won't be that kind of king. Brienne hesitated, then placed a hand lightly on his golden forearm, a gesture of comfort. I know. He turned to her, meeting her eyes in the silvery glow. Memories of 1,000 shared trials flickered between them. How they had once been enemies forced to travel together. How he had saved her from a bear. How she had looked at him when he confessed what truly happened with the Mad King. There was so much unspoken, too many barriers, yet an undeniable closeness. He found himself leaning toward her, the moment stretching. Her lips parted, and for an instant he thought she might close the distance. But then she drew back, caution winning out. You should rest, she murmured, stepping away. Tomorrow will be another long day. He let the breath he was holding slip out. Yes. You're right, of course. He tried to mask the pang of disappointment. Good night, Brienne. She inclined her head. Good night, Jaime. She left him there, the space between them aching. He glanced down at his golden hand, flexing the metal fingers that would never truly feel. Perhaps he thought that was fitting. He had lost a hand once for saving her. He had lost so many illusions since then. And now as king, maybe he had lost the chance at a simpler bond with her. Duty overshadowed everything. Eventually, he returned to his chambers and sank into a restless sleep. 2 days passed. Word spread through the city that Lord Gendry Baratheon would be formally acknowledged. Crowds gathered outside the Red Keep, curious to see this new Stormlord who bore King Robert's blood. Jaime opted for a modest ceremony in the throne room. A few heralds, the small council in attendance, Gendry's knights, and representatives of the city. There would be no lavish feasts, no tourneys. The kingdom was still too battered for frivolous celebrations. Jaime sat upon the Iron Throne as Gendry entered the hall. The hall was not full to bursting, but enough onlookers were present to lend a sense of gravity. Tyrion and Brienne stood to Jaime's right. Grand Maester Balabar hovered to the left, ready with the official documents. The hush in the chamber echoed with the shuffle of boots and the whisper of cloaks. Gendry knelt before the dais, head bowed. Jaime rose. His voice carried, resonating in the vast space. Gendry Baratheon, you have come to swear fealty and seek recognition of your lordship over the Stormlands. Know that by kneeling here, you bind yourself to the unity of the realm under the Iron Throne. In return, I grant you guardianship of Storm's End and its lands with the rights and responsibilities thereof. Do you so swear? Gendry's deep voice replied, I do swear, by the Seven and by the memory of my father, to uphold my duties and to serve the realm in peace and in war. Jaime stepped down from the throne, the circlet on his brow glinting. He drew the sword at his hip, not his old Valyrian steel, but a fine blade nonetheless. He touched it lightly to Gendry's shoulder. Then rise, Lord Gendry Baratheon of Storm's End, and be known as a loyal vassal of the crown. Applause rippled through the hall, subdued but sincere. Gendry stood, relief and a hint of pride lighting his features. Jaime sheathed his sword and extended a hand. Gendry clasped it firmly. Thank you, your grace, he said. The Stormlands stand with you. Jaime offered a curt nod. May our alliance bring an end to the fighting that has plagued us for too long. A handful of Gendry's knights let out hearty cheers. Tyrion nodded approvingly, and Brienne's eyes shone with quiet satisfaction at another piece of unity sealed. The hall soon dispersed, leaving only a few stragglers. Jaime lingered at the base of the throne, exchanging final words with Gendry about shipping routes and possible joint patrols to keep bandits at bay. Eventually, Gendry departed, and Jaime felt a measure of accomplishment. Another region bound to peace, at least in principle. Only to have a messenger dash in with urgent tidings, rumors from the Iron Islands that Yara Greyjoy was making moves to expand her territory, sending longships to harass the western coast of the north and the Riverlands. The small council reconvened in haste, the glimmer of hope overshadowed by the next crisis. Thus it went day after day. Jaime learned that a king's work was never done, especially a king presiding over a realm so fractured. One threat receded, another emerged. One alliance was made, another demanded compromise. He felt as though he were walking a knife's edge, fighting to prevent the realm from plunging into chaos again. Throughout it all, Brienne remained at his side, her counsel steady and her sword readied. Sometimes, late at night, he would confide in her about the weight he carried. She listened, offering practical suggestions or simply the quiet companionship he so sorely needed. On occasion, he caught a softness in her gaze that sparked a flicker of longing in him. But always, they kept their distance, bound by duty and the unspoken fear that any closeness might unravel what fragile control remained in the realm. Tyrion, too, was ever present, juggling the crown's finances and forging political solutions where possible. He arranged a parley with representatives from the Iron Islands, hoping to dissuade Yara from further raids. He drafted letters to Lady Sansa, who wrote back with cautious acceptance of the realm's new shape. The peace with the North held, if only because they were too exhausted for further war. The same was true of the Vale, the Reach, and the Stormlands. Still, the unknown threat that had murdered that man and pinned a note to his chest remained unresolved. Lord Brayton had uncovered few leads. Some whispered about roving assassins with a grudge against the Lannisters, others suggested it might be a group of religious zealots who saw Jaime's rule as an affront. Conspiracy theories abounded, but nothing was confirmed. On a cool evening, Jaime called for Brienne to join him in the courtyard. He wanted to spar with her to test the reflexes of his left-handed sword work. She agreed with only slight reluctance. "You should be focusing on your duties," she said. "This is part of my duty," he replied. "A king needs to keep his skills sharp. And I need the exercise." So they faced each other in the torchlit yard, the muffled clang of steel echoing. Jaime wore light armor, a practiced blade in his left hand. Brienne wielded her longsword with practiced grace. The first few passes were tentative, each gauging the other's reflexes. Jaime still felt the old twinge of frustration at his missing sword hand, but he had learned to adapt. He pivoted, blocked a strike, stepped in with a counter that Brienne deftly sidestepped. "Faster," she murmured, eyes narrowing. "You're leaving your right side open." He snorted. "I'm well aware." They continued, trading blows in a dance of steel and breath. Though the match was friendly, there was an undercurrent of tension, as if both tried to exorcise the stress that burdened them. Jaime found himself sweating, heart pounding, almost relishing the familiar rush of battle. Here, there were no decrees, no plague, no politics, just the clash of swords and the singular focus of combat. Brienne pushed him on the defense, forcing him to twist awkwardly. He tried a riposte, nearly catching her side, but she parried and swung in an arc that tapped his breastplate, signifying a kill strike. He stepped back, breathing heavily. She lowered her blade, also winded, her cheeks flushed. "You're improving," she said. "But you still rely on old habits from fighting with your right hand." He wiped sweat from his forehead. "Old habits die hard. But I appreciate the lesson." She nodded, eyes flicking to his golden hand. "It's an adjustment, but you manage better than many might in your position." He caught her gaze, and a moment of wordless understanding passed between them, how their circumstances had bound them, how they had each saved the other more than once. Then the tension of that look was broken by the arrival of a steward calling Jaime to an urgent matter in the throne room. Brienne sheathed her sword, and the moment slipped away, leaving them both to wonder if it would ever return. As the days passed, the shape of Jaime's reign slowly solidified. He continued to address the city's woes, forging trade deals, sending out letters to reaffirm alliances, even dispatching peacekeeping forces to the Riverlands to curb the Ironborn raids. The sickness in Flea Bottom began to recede, thanks to the combined efforts of the Grand Maester, the Faith's healers, and the shipments from Pentos. Yet always there loomed the knowledge that enemies lurked. Whispers circulated of mercenary companies forming in the shadows, of old Targaryen loyalists stirring. The rumor that Daenerys Targaryen might still live persisted, though no credible source confirmed it. Jaime tried not to dwell on these specters. He had enough to handle with the problems he could see. On the night the fever finally broke in Flea Bottom, Grand Maester Balabar came to Jaime's solar with good news. "We've had fewer deaths this week, Your Grace. The new herbs from Essos have helped immensely." Jaime's relief was palpable. "Good. That's one plague managed at least." The Grand Maester's face grew somber. "But we must be ever vigilant. Hunger and cold can breed new illnesses. We have to keep the city fed through winter." Jaime nodded, steeling himself. "We will." "Thank you, Maester." Later, in the candlelit hours, Jaime stood on the balcony overlooking the silent city. This time, he sensed a shift in the air, no longer the stench of refuse and despair, but a faint promise of something else. Recovery, perhaps. Hard-won and fragile, but real. He thought of how he had once believed kingship meant glory and adoration. Now he understood that the best a king could hope for was to mitigate suffering and uphold a precarious peace. He gazed out at the sprawl of rooftops, the patchwork of torches below. He recalled the words he had once spoken to Brienne in that bathhouse at Harrenhal, telling her the story of why he killed the Mad King, how he could not stand by and watch the city burn. Now, all these years later, he was the king himself, charged with preventing new disasters. Perhaps that was the final twist of fate. The man who slew the tyrant was forced to bear the crown, redeeming the very city he once saved. Behind him, he heard the door open softly. He turned to see Brienne stepping onto the balcony. She wore a simple tunic, a short cloak against the chill. A question flickered in her blue eyes as she approached. "I saw the light." You're still awake. He half smiled. A king's tasks never end. She came to stand beside him, arms resting on the balustrade. For a while, they simply looked at the city, a quiet sense of shared vigil. Then, without preamble, Brienne said, "You've done well, Jaime." Her use of his name, without titles, made his chest tighten. "Have I? The city still suffers. The realm still totters. It's better than it was," she said firmly. "And you're trying every day. You're not the man who once pushed a child from a tower window." He flinched at that memory, the darkest secret of his past. But she was right, he had once done a monstrous thing. And she knew it. Yet she remained at his side, seeing more than just the sins. He bowed his head. "I did terrible things for Cersei, for my family. I can't change that. But I can keep trying to atone, I suppose." She reached for his hand, his real one, and gave it a gentle squeeze. The warmth of her fingers surprised him. He lifted his gaze, meeting hers in the moonlight. Something unspoken passed between them, gratitude, affection, maybe even love. He felt the weight of the crown on his brow, the memory of Cersei's final breath, the swirl of guilt and duty. But for a moment, her touch grounded him. I'm glad you stayed," he whispered, "to help me through this." She exhaled softly. "I made an oath long ago, to protect innocence and serve justice. I think staying here is part of that. Helping you prevent more madness is part of that." His lips parted, heart pounding in his chest. He wanted to say more, to speak of the longing he felt when she was near. But the words were tangled in all the constraints of kingship, the ghosts of the past, the uncertain future. Instead, he gently brought her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss against her knuckles. She inhaled, eyes widening in a flicker of vulnerability. Then, he released her hand. They stood there a moment longer, the hush of night enveloping them. At last, Brienne cleared her throat, stepping back. "We should both rest," she murmured, a hint of trembling in her tone. He nodded. "Yes. Good night, Brienne. Good night, Jaime." She slipped away, leaving him alone with the stars and the city lights below. His mind churned with a heady mix of hope and sorrow. Perhaps one day, he thought, he could allow himself more than guilt and duty. Perhaps one day, if the realm truly stabilized, he could be not just a king, but a man free to love openly. For now, he turned his gaze once more to the city, reminding himself of the vow he had taken. He would not fail these people, no matter the cost. Even if it meant suppressing his own yearnings, he would wear this crown and wield power with a steadier hand than any tyrant before him. And if the price of that was his own happiness, so be it. Better that than to see everything he had fought for descend into flames. He stood vigil until the moon slid behind drifting clouds, the torches below guttering into the hush of night. In that stillness, Jaime Lannister, twice a kingslayer, once a broken knight, now a reluctant king, resolved to greet each new day with the unwavering intent to mend what had been broken, even if mending required him to forever carry the scars of his old sins. And so he remained, alone beneath the sky, yet not quite lonely, for he sensed that somewhere in the keep, Brienne kept her own watch. The city waited, and the realm stirred with cautious dreams of peace. Tomorrow, there would be fresh challenges, new threats and demands, but tonight, for one fleeting moment, a hush of possibility lingered in the crisp air. It was enough to keep him standing at the balcony rail, heart brimming with both burdens and quiet, nascent hope.